Thank you very much. I'm Eric Goldberg. I've been in the games industry since dinosaurs roamed the internet, going back about over 35 years. One of my lots in life seems to be to get into new technologies before they change the games field and leave just before the money shows up in a big way. In any event, what I want to do is we are at a period where there are three major disruptions, including apparently on the microphone. All right. I'm pressing the green thing, and it is not.
Green arrow, not the green laser.
Ah, the green arrow. All right. There we are. Okay, so I have been in the field for forever. Things I called correctly, I was was mobile and F2P, which were the last two great significant changes. I'm sorry, closer to here? Okay, thank you. All right, forgive the technical difficulties. If you want some wrong predictions, that's a longer list than we have time to give over here. I've worked on both the business and the venture side, and I did this in consultation with some of the people who are living with these changes. So, what are these disruptors? Connective tissues are communications channels and game-focused in general social media. So things like Facebook, things like Twitter, things like Twitch. Spectating. Esports is the part of spectating that gets all the attention. It is the bright, shiny object, and it is a profound change. But the even more interesting change is that people are now watching games. We are people who grew up.
Take two. Oh, much better. We are seeing a population, especially a young population, that is watching games where all of us grew up playing them and thinking they were interactive. And the third major change, which is the one that's been most talked about, is subscriptions. Access to a game for a single base price and generally metered by an amount of time, usually a month. These will affect design, business, and service operations. In other words, they will profoundly change the way we run game businesses and that we design games. So you heard about at GDC, AI, machine learning, and cloud gaming were going to change the world, and they were the major disruptors. They changed the way games are developed. The latter three are about how games are built. The ones that we're going to cover today are how they are chosen and consumed. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, you've heard in the last few years about changes that are going to be a fairly big deal. And these include things that did not happen, like VR and AR, or excuse me, are at least waiting to happen. So let's start by giving you some context about why these things are upon us. In spectating, about 10 to 20% of Western game consumption is watching games. This includes about 5-6 years ago. I was just doing a quick look around the room. I think all of you, at least all of you who grew up in the US, grew up watching Saturday morning cartoons. As of about 5 to 6 years ago, there was a minute-for-minute replacement in terms of the amount of time it was not being spent by 8 to 12-year-olds watching cartoons. It was watching things like Minecraft videos. It is a complete sea change by generation. It's highest now among the 6 to 24 age demographic. The 20-somethings do it more to follow streamers and to actually see new games, to get bite-sized looks at games. It is even more established in East Asia, where you will see that where the ecosystems are a bit different. You can learn some useful things from Asia, but unless you have a native guide or unless you speak the language, you will not be able to find a certain amount of information. Next, there is on the subscriptions. There are at least 4 major subscription services about to enter the market. That doesn't necessarily mean that any of them will succeed, but if players like Apple and Microsoft and Google want to be able to do something, it will have a fairly profound effect. So you can check back on me in about 5 years. I believe none of these subscription services will do well enough in this year to satisfy those very large companies' financial expectations, but they will still manage to disrupt because they will change the way that users buy games and that they consume games. And then in terms of communications and social media, which we'll dive into in a moment, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch are essentially, we're talking about two players who have multiple billions of users, and we have one that only has a couple 100 million. I'd say they're fairly here. All right, so the first issue with the connective tissue is who controls the player relationship. Go back 5-10 years. Every time that somebody was doing something with games, they would set up nice little communities, they would have moderators, they would have units in which people got together. Now, all these other major players have interposed themselves and are part of the relationship. What they have is they have a broader relation. They touch more people, they touch more gamers than your game can ever hope to touch. Even if you are League of Legends, even if you are except for maybe Candy Crush Saga, all these players touch more than you have to deal with, and they know more than you. It's become a commonplace in the last 2 years of congressional hearings that the major services like Google and Facebook, quote, know more about you than you know about yourself. These relationships are much harder to break than the connections to individual games. So one or more of these intermediaries can touch every player interaction external to the game. That means that anytime you are communicating with a player in any way, shape, or form, whether you send them an email, whether you're trying to get them to gather their particular group for something, there is at least one and maybe two other players who know what your players are doing, and also who can choose to interfere or influence with what they are pulling together. They also have the ability to get into games. For example, any of you who have Messenger on your phone or have any number of other apps, every single word you are saying is being recorded. Now, maybe if your players only grunt, you may be better off for being able to do that. But the level of information and the sheer level of data and the sheer level of connections they can make are so much better than your, forgive me to go all Darth Vader on you, your poor, pitiful efforts to be able to understand your players. And so the net result is that management of a game's connective partners, or I should say, management of the ecosystem in which you work matters a great deal, and is now almost a required skill for being able to run a game in the cloud continuous service world. So who are these people who go in? Well, there are so many of them that I had to give up after 6 bullet points, but we'll go in the descending order. The social media giants we talked about, the general video services, which include YouTube and Twitch, both of which are owned by major other large players. Sorry, the general video services like YouTube, the game video services like Twitch. And these people matter more because they care about the distinction matters because these people care more about your data. The game chat services, such as Discord, which we'll talk about in a moment, the messaging players, and the streamers, which we'll get into. And then every single thing that a player allows into the game, or that you end up putting an API or putting in, is someone who can interpose or affect your relationship with your players. So let's walk through what some of these guys can do. The social media giants. We are told, and it is believed by a large percentage of this population, that social media was used to influence the 2016 presidential election. We're told that social media was able to sway the Brexit vote so that the British population voted to leave the European Union. If they can basically change things in your home country, they can certainly change things in your game. The general video services. So YouTube, when you go into YouTube, they do a couple of things. Hi, would you like to use this Facebook service? Okay, you don't like that. Would you like to use this other Facebook service? And oh, by the way, while you're here, we're going to, and while we want you to concentrate on the game, we've got this wall of text with all these interesting comments which will take you away from the game because you'll be reading in the comment letters. It doesn't mean that you are away from the game, that you're taken out of the game, but it does mean you're taken away from playing the game to read various comments. Game chat services. Well, Discord, how many of you have used Discord? Okay, so Discord, as you are all aware, can take over the entire screen. So there is a conversation where I'm going to have to scrub off the names, but let's just say 2 of the 4 giant traditional game publishers went to Discord and said, enough of this shit, or something equivalent. We're going to disintegrate. We're going to remove our integration because you're able to basically take people out of our game. You're able to take people from Call of Duty and put them into Red Dead Redemption and persuade them to go over there. And Discord said effectively, we'll get back to you on that. And large company A said to large company B, we're in mid-cycle. Why don't you show Discord what it means, why they have to stop this? And large company B said, no thanks, you can have the honor of having the shitstorm when you pull it out and you take these features away from the players. In other words, if somebody wants to, all these guys can do the equivalent of saying, all right, Eric and Chris, you both like Call of Duty. Let's move you to Red Dead Redemption. That's not working. You both like Game of Thrones. That's not working. You both have autistic children. I mean, in other words, these people have the information, these organizations have the ability to move things, and they are slowly, I'm using exaggerated examples, but they are able to basically move your players one way or another. Going to messaging, Twitter and WeChat, we don't have time over here, but if you want to understand what can be done with the messaging layer, you should definitely read up on what's going on in China, where the messaging layer is the main level at which things are going. You will see the messaging layer become a big thing in the US. I just will commend that. That's at least 3 to 5 years out. Some of these other things are here and now. And then lastly, streamers. So most of you may have heard that Apex Legends became a big hit when EA did not particularly promote it. So Respawn went to a couple of hot streamers and basically asked them to blast Apex Legends as the main thing on their channel for a month. It made it work. We are now in a position where the streamers are coming back to the game companies and saying, here's how we'd like to have you change what you're doing. By the way, in the back, I do not have, the timer is at 0, so I have no idea how much time I'm at.
You've got about 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Okay, then I'm sorry, then I'll have to, then we start late. Okay. So the issue, okay, what can these guys do? They can distract. They can offer other services, as I described. They can put in the text comments, as I described. They can do influence. They can encourage people to purchase things or not purchase things. They can follow you by your interests, the example that I mentioned with Game of Thrones. They can capture, as I mentioned, with Discord, and they can recapture. What's interesting with the streamer, this is the one positive thing, and it's an example that you should all look at. So when a streamer has been paid, and it's fairly public that one streamer was paid $1 million to broadcast Apex Legends. After a month, all of a sudden their players want them to keep doing Apex Legends because that's what they've been watching for a month. You need to think about jujitsu with each of these things over here because you cannot change the power that Facebook and Twitter and these companies all have. Next, spectating. All of us in this room, and you all look, as I said earlier, you all look old enough that you grew up thinking that games were things that were the one interactive entertainment media. We are now seeing something where people are willing to lay back and do it. So the emerging spectating behaviors, top-level competition. That's something that is people playing at a level that you can't hope to play. The best players of the esports are 18 to 20. You age out around 21 or 22. That's neurological. Passive entertainment. The reason why people just want to watch something, they want to turn off their mind. They don't want to watch a movie. They don't want to watch a TV show. Personalities such as streamers. Game highlights. Often people do not want to play 20 hours to figure out what the neat sequences are, so they say, here's a new game. Someone's going to show me what happens when I've played it in 10 hours and I've mastered it. And then social activity with friends and acquaintances, which is the reason why this is spreading fairly quickly. So there is now also a spectrum between player consumption between watching and playing. That is, somebody will watch, then they'll play, then they'll have some minor influence on the game. So the problem with spectating is it basically screws with the current dominant business models. It basically decimates premium sales. If you're watching it, why should you pay $29 or let alone $50 or $60? It doesn't play nice, as I said, with traditional F2P, but there are two places where it does do well. One is if you make your whales or even your dolphins aware that they are being watched by people, then they can be encouraged to show off. One, in terms of you can incentivize them to basically pay to perform, and you can incentivize them to be able to show off something that's personalized, the latest dance move, the most distinctive costume. And also something that's occurred in Asia that's starting to come here is gifting. In other words, someone plays particularly well, they're in entertainment, it's like a busker where you give them money for being able to do things. Linear entertainment business models, however, are a poor fit for games. Advertising, we've tried in games many times. The only people who make money in advertising that's significant to their business are the people who run the advertising networks. The long tail, which works very well for movies, or Casablanca, or for music with the Beatles catalog, doesn't work very well over here because most of our old games are from the OSs at that time forgot, and they don't particularly sell right now. Even the medium tail doesn't do terribly well. Revenues depend in spectating on basically think of yourself as in a broadcast business, which is a completely different set of expectations that we've been trained in the last several years. So when you think about games for spectators, play patterns map to consumption. You have to figure out whether someone is looking to be passive, whether someone is looking to be linear. In other words, they want to see a story develop. So that's rather different than something like a builder game. And the other thing that's interesting, in which some of the best design innovations are coming out, and some of the major companies like Ubisoft and Amazon are experimenting with this, is what happens when people want to play, then watch, then play. There's a whole set of other design considerations and different types of games that will come around that. The thing about what I call the Schrödinger spectator, it is we are seeing people who we are seeing a lot of play, especially the younger groups. We don't have enough data on the older groups, where people essentially, one night they'll want to go passive, another night they'll want to play at a certain level, and they'll want to play at a lower level. These are behaviors that will change the way that you design. We're going to have to rediscover our cutscene chops. We're going to have to know that we need to do trailers and we need to do interstitials to be able to do things. And then the other thing to consider is within as soon as 3 and no longer than 7 years, you should assume that 50% of all consumption will be watching in some shape or form in the Western world. Lastly, one thing that gets talked about a fair bit is subscriptions. It's going to work because the value proposition is attractive to customers. The idea that you get a lot of games for one price, a controlled price, is an extremely attractive proposition, and the pressure will mean that it works. The biggest issue with it, however, is that traditional subscriptions are not set up well for the games business. So, Netflix for games is what we keep hearing. However, most of you play the same games repeatedly, which is not the way that any other subscription works. Maybe music, but they get so little money out of it, they're not a good example to look at. There's no long tail, as I mentioned, and there's only an abbreviated medium tail. And it's not going to happen as the industry diagrams that you hear a lot of people saying they're going to do their walled garden, there's going to be the EA subscription area, there's going to be various ones which are the equivalent of just Apple properties or something like that. the basic thing is the IP owner and service dynamics flips with critical mass. Right now, people will pay you any amount of money to get things going, and then once they get enough people, they will treat only the people who cause renewal to occur. And forgive me, since I'm about to run out of time, renewal is the end-all and be-all. It is something in which there'll be very few winners, and I give a couple of examples of the developer-friendly hierarchy, and then unfortunately I'm out of time. Thank you all for listening. I'm sorry this was so dense. I had planned for a longer period of time. Can I get one or two questions from the audience, or are we out of time?
No, let's take the time to get a good question or two, perhaps, if there are any. Yeah, well let's do it in this order. I'll go to you first, and then I'll come to you next.
Okay, so you said that subscriptions, like the traditional subscription, isn't good for games. What does a good subscription service for games look like? Is it something similar to how Origin has a lower tier and a higher tier, or something different?
Well, you have to think about things that are game friendly. So let me just try. Oh, sorry, can't go back on that. So, for example, you can think about something that says you can have a game where you can pay a lower tier if you're paying for repeating use of a game. Mm-hmm. So, for example, let's say you buy a tier and what you really want to play is Candy Crush Saga. Mm-hmm. So you say, look, I just want to be able to play Candy Crush Saga. I'm going to pay $4.95 a month. But if I want a wider selection, I'm going to pay $9.95 a month, because that recognizes something like the repeat play pattern. Number two, you do something that you can do something that is the equivalent of windowing or grandfathering. So, for example, you can say something that you can allow something where you graduate out of the subscription service because you come attached to a heavy use game. I can go through some other examples, but what you have to do is think. The best way to answer your question is just reverse engineer from how people play games, not from how people watch movies or TV. The one thing where you can learn from TV is you can do episodic games. That is rewarded in a game subscription service. So we do games where a new piece is released in May. There's a new exciting piece coming up in June or at latest July, and therefore the subscription business model is aligned with that of the gameplay. But again, work backwards from how people consume.
So just take this gentleman's question. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, my question is kind of similar. With all the increasing number of subscriptions we're all owning, and with at least 4 coming, is there some level of everyone's going to only be able to buy one subscription, or do you foresee people buying like 4 separate services? Like, at what level do people just stop buying more subscriptions?
Well, there's a giant experiment being done by about 10 or 15 of the wealthiest corporations of the world to see how many streaming services we can do. We know the answer is lower than 15, and we know the answer is higher than 2. But my guess is that the number we're going to see, you've asked the question the right way. So the absolute number of things that people are willing to subscribe to is one number, and then the absolute number of game services is a smaller number. My guess is that because of the repeat playability of games, to go to your question, that at most people are going to be between 1 and 2 game services. So the average will be 1.63 or something, or some number like that. And again, it's just by working out behaviors. The other issue that's going to occur, one of the reasons why I think subscription services are going to have a problem in the next several years, is there's going to be so much subscription fatigue because everyone's launching their Netflix competitor. There's the Disney service, there's the Comcast service, you can just go down the list. So we're going to have a battle where people are probably going to do price cutting, and they're going to do everything costs money. You have to pay CBS to get Star Trek, you have to get this, and there's going to probably be a fair bit of consumer backlash. That's one of the reasons why I think it'll fail. But when this all settles out, 5-6 years from now, I think the answer is between 1 and 2.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for Eric Goldberg there and his introduction to the business disruptions. Thank you.